We have Congressman DeSantis, fresh from some congressional hearings. I saw him on TV the other day, and let's give the floor to him. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. It's great to be here. I'm sorry, I'm not only keeping you from the Democratic National Convention, but I think Nancy Pelosi is actually speaking right now. So you guys are really missing out, trust me. Lock her up. You know, it's interesting because as they gather for their event in Cleveland or in Philadelphia, there's a lot that's going to be said and has been said. For example, last night, not one speaker all night mentioned terrorism or ISIS. Or Islamic radicalism, and I doubt you're going to hear very much about that today. Today they're basically bringing people in, I think, that are going to criticize the police, and so they're really doing a lot of damage, I think, to their own party with their behavior. But the biggest damage to me is that they're nominating somebody who, when I was in the Navy, would not have qualified for a security clearance. Right. And that's just the reality. And so what I'd like to do is just do a few minutes on going through the whole saga with Hillary, because I've kind of been in that from the beginning, and how we've tried to get some answers from people like Comey and Loretta Lynch, and where we stand from here. Let's just understand what this whole thing is about. It's not about the fact that she sent just normal messages on a private email. Yeah, she is supposed to use the government email to conduct official business because she's an executive branch officer. Those are public records. The issue is she did not safeguard the national security secrets of our country. And her email setup was part of that, but it was really her disregard for safeguarding top secret information that renders her unfit to be commander-in-chief. And so we have to understand that's the key thing. So how does this even come about? When she got nominated to be Secretary of State, the first thing she did was set up the private server in her basement in Chappaqua, New York. And the reason why she wanted to do that is because she didn't want her communications to be subjected to freedom of information requests from people like you. She didn't want congressional oversight over her activities. And so she was very interested in shielding her communications and shielding herself from public accountability. And I think there's different reasons why she wanted to do that, but she was very insistent on doing that. So she sets up this whole special contraption, knowing full well that that unsecured private system is not going to be sufficient, not only to do normal State Department business, but clearly not going to be something that can handle classified information of any level, but certainly not top secret information. So she made a deliberate choice to protect her own political interests and to try to keep herself from being held accountable, knowing full well, because anybody who's rational would know that you're exposing the country and you're exposing the integrity of her communications to potential interception, and you're not going to be safeguarding this information. So that's how we even got to this point, because of her knowing decision, which she had intent to make from the very beginning. And so this started going on once they did the Benghazi thing, the emails, everything came out. And I saw from the beginning the problems with the Justice Department, because Loretta Lynch was appointed U.S. Attorney in the 90s by Bill Clinton. So she had a relationship with the Clinton family. So I led the effort to try to have the Justice Department appoint a special counsel. And we got 50, 60 members of Congress. I handed her a letter, all this stuff. The media didn't want to cover it. So they were really under no pressure to have a special counsel consider this. And so you basically have Loretta Lynch. She has a relationship with the Clintons. Her current boss, Barack Obama, said multiple times publicly that nothing happened here, there's no damage to national security. He also says he doesn't get involved in investigations. Well, if you're not involved in the investigation, how do you know that there was no damage to national security? So he said that over and over again. Not only that, he endorses Hillary for president when she's under FBI investigation. And, of course, Loretta meets with Bill Clinton on her private plane for 30 minutes, 3 or 4 days before, actually 2 days before the FBI was going to interview Hillary, and then, as we know now, 3 or 4 days before the ultimate decision was rendered by Director Comey. And not only that, but when Hillary met with the FBI, President Obama had a campaign stop for the following Tuesday or Monday scheduled with Hillary in North Carolina. And so this is all the facts and circumstances. No reasonable person would say that there's not a conflict here and that this decision should have been made by somebody who didn't have the political allegiances that Lynch did. Well, she didn't care, and she basically was not going to recuse herself from the case. But what she said was, I am not going to recuse myself, but I'm going to accept the recommendation that I get from the FBI. And so for their decision, I will accept, which, one, is nonsense, because it's her job to decide whether a case goes forward. I was a prosecutor. The law enforcement comes to you. They can build a case. They don't get to decide that. The prosecutor gets to decide that. And so the whole thing was a sham. And so we got, when Comey went out for his press conference, and I knew from the beginning Lynch was not going to indict Hillary. I told people, don't hold your breath on that. But I thought Comey would put together a case, and I thought there was a good chance he would recommend prosecution. And that would be a very difficult thing if Lynch is not doing it when Comey has recommended it. So what Comey ends up doing, he comes out, he gives this lengthy statement, and basically is indicting her on all the particulars. Every single fact he's laying out is damning. It showed that she lied consistently to the public for over a year about everything. She said there was no classified center receipt. That is false. She said there was no marked classified. That is false. She said she only had one device. That's why she did it for convenience. That is false. She had multiple devices. They said that she said she turned over all the work-related emails to the State Department. That was false. She said her lawyers tried to recover things. Not only was that false, her lawyers scrubbed the systems clean so that the FBI couldn't forensically examine them. So all of this, and so I'm thinking, wow, this is really bad for her. But then he says, in spite of this, no reasonable prosecutor would bring a case like this. And it was frustrating because if you look at the statute says that if you expose classified to in an unsecured area and you do that through your own gross negligence, then you're liable. And that's been on the books for a long time. And then there's another statute, so that's 18 U.S.C. 793F. There's also 18 U.S.C. 1924, which says if you participate in removing classified from its proper place of storage and put it in an unclassified area, then you're also guilty. That's a misdemeanor. And the facts that Comey laid out, she's guilty of both of those. Because her whole system, clearly she was grossly negligent when you have 8 different top secret email strings going back and forth that not only she received, but some that she sent. She's clearly grossly negligent, but she's also doing it knowingly because she's taken the classified and she's sending some of these emails, and then she's receiving some that Comey admitted anybody would know are things that you can't have in an unclassified system. And the reason why some of her denials are so ridiculous is because anyone that's ever been in this situation handling classified, you know what a big deal it is. When I was in Iraq, we were in a tent in Fallujah. The command center was a big tent, so if someone did indirect fire, it could go right through the top of the tent. But where the top secret information was in a special fortified room called a SCIF for special compartmental information. And when you went in, you had to sign in. You would never take information out of there. You couldn't even put information from there on a classified secret email system because it was a higher level than that. And you know exactly the type of information that is instinctively classified at top secret. Signals intelligence, human intelligence. That's what was in her emails. And so that's the situation that you have. But Comey says, he basically said she was grossly negligent. He said it was extremely careless. Same thing, I think. But he said, in all these cases, we only bring prosecutions if there is an intent to violate the law or an intent to harm the United States. Well, first of all, that's wrong in 2 reasons. One, ignorance of the law is just not a defense. You don't have to know that what you're doing is illegal. You have to know what you're doing. Yeah, you have to do things knowingly, but you don't have to know the statutes. And people are held liable all the time. And not only that, gross negligence, the Justice Department prosecutes negligence for environmental crimes and other all the time. So and in fact, if any one of us were to go out on the street tonight and not look at people crossing the street and you run someone over, you're going to get prosecuted for negligent homicide maybe if the person dies. That happens every day in this country. So the idea that you have to intend to violate the law is not something that has support throughout jurisprudence. But then he says she didn't have an intent to harm the United States. That's not required by the statute, and in fact, you can see why that would not be needed, because if I know you're taking classified and you're intentionally giving it to the enemy, there are a bunch of statutes that you could be prosecuted for that. So that's an easy case to make. But when you want to do a good job of actually protecting the classified, it's not just the people who intentionally give it to the enemy that you're worried about. You have people that have duties to the public to protect this information, and so when you have statutes that prevent dissemination through gross negligence, you really need that in order to have a regime that's going to protect everything as best as we can. If you say the only way we're ever going to hold you liable is if you give it to the Chinese, then that means I could just take classified home from me from the Navy base, leave it on my kitchen table, and say, well, I didn't intend to harm the United States. You would never be able to get away from that. So he said the Justice Department, and he blamed the Justice Department that they're very, very skeptical about bringing these types of prosecutions. So I think what happened was that he was getting guidance from the Justice Department saying, we're not doing gross negligence, so build your case, but you got to show that she intended to harm the country, otherwise we're not going to take it. And we brought in Loretta Lynch. So we were doing back and forth with Comey all the time. I think everything he said factually is devastating to Hillary Clinton, because if anybody in the FBI, the military, CIA, were to have done what she done, they would immediately lose their security clearance. They would probably be terminated on the spot, and they very well may face a court-martial if you're in the military, or prosecution if you're in civilian society. And so she's being treated differently than anybody else would be treated. But Lynch comes to the Congress after we questioned Comey, and she wouldn't answer a single question. She says, no, I'm not going to get into it. I'm not going to justify it. She wouldn't even answer questions about, well, what type of standard do you use? Do you do gross negligence? Or do you have a policy against gross negligence cases? Forget about the facts here. Can you answer? Hear no evil, see no evil. And she basically delivered, I think, one of the all-time most dismal performances in front of the Congress. But basically, what it was a display of utter contempt for the American people. It's a display of utter contempt for the idea that people should be treated equally under the law. It's a contempt for the idea that she, as Attorney General, is not a master of ours, but a servant of ours, and that it's her job to seek justice. And so that is kind of where she left it. And so Comey, so after all this happens, they're not going to bring the case. So we go to the State Department. They have reopened their security investigation, and I think what's going to happen with that is, given what the FBI found, Puma, Jake Sullivan, all Hillary's minions, I think their security clearances have to be yanked. And I think that may happen. So they end up, if Hillary, God forbids, in the White House, Puma ain't going to have a security clearance. I mean, at a minimum, that needs to be the case. And then we referred to Comey her testimony in front of the Benghazi Committee because she said there was no classified. She said there was no markings. Well, that's not true. And so they're going to now have to look to see whether she perjured herself before Congress. I would not hold your breath on that, because if they didn't think she had the requisite intent to satisfy a gross negligence statute, they're going to say, well, she may not have been sure. Comey said to me, he's like, well, she lacks sophistication in dealing with classified information. Not only is she the Secretary of State that handles it, she is what we call an original classification authority, so part of it is her job to determine what's classified and what's not. So I think that they're going to say there wasn't requisite intent. So I think at the end of the day, we have a situation where what Comey did was he didn't recommend a legal indictment, but what he effectively did is sketch out a political indictment against her. And I think November is the time where that indictment is tried before the American people, who can act as the jury and say, we don't want somebody to be our commander-in-chief who wouldn't even be able to hold a job as a lieutenant in the Navy for how she's behaved. and we can render her guilty as charged. And I think we have to make the case. And I think the American people are sick of anyone that's connected to the government, somehow they have a lower standard than the average taxpayer or the average American. We see it too with the IRS. The IRS targets conservative groups. This came in 2013. We started investigating it, and we tried to get all these answers. We knew Holder wasn't going to prosecute anybody. So we sent subpoenas to get Lois Lerner's emails from Congress twice. And the FBI, or the IRS, after we sent those subpoenas, a couple months later, they destroyed 24,000 of Lois Lerner's emails that were under 2 congressional subpoenas. You had the Commissioner Koskinen came to Congress and made multiple statements that are demonstrably false in front of congressional committees under oath. And they didn't even do basic due diligence to try to get the answer. We asked for the information. They didn't look at her Lerner's BlackBerry. They didn't look at the backup tapes. So here's the thing. If you as a taxpayer were the subject of an IRS audit and you destroyed the documents they wanted and you lied to them and you said, you know what, I'm not going to even try to look for what you're doing, there is no way you would ever be able to get away with that. And yet we have an IRS that just slough it off. So I was the first one, Congressman Jim Jordan and I were the first ones about a year ago now to call for the impeachment of the IRS commissioner. We wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. We said Obama needs to remove him, and if he doesn't, then we need to use our authority to do so. And so we've pressed the case. We're getting pushed back. We finally got a couple hearings in the Judiciary Committee to go over it. They're dragging their feet. So we had a couple of my colleagues filed what's called a privilege resolution to force a vote on impeaching the IRS commissioner. So this is right before Congress broke for recess. So when we go back the day after Labor Day, the impeachment of the IRS commissioner is going to come up before the House of Representatives. And so the question is, do you want to impeach him, or do you want to try to say, oh, we're just going to table it or send it back to committee or not? So that's going to be a moment of truth for a lot of Republicans. Obviously, you know where I stand because I was one of the leaders on this. But I think the accountability issue, I think, is 2 things. One is a Republican form of government. We're either equal under the law or we're not. And if we're not, then we don't really have a constitutional system as the founders understood it. But also it goes to whether we have the proper constitutional checks and balances and separation of power. Because right now, Congress, we're your immediate guardians, the people you elect to defend your interests and to redress your grievances. And if we send a subpoena to an agency like the IRS and they're able to just give us the back of their hand and ignore us, that's an attack on you guys. Because you guys deserve the truth about what happened. And so if Congress is just going to sit there and let the executive branch trample all over us, you're going to continue to have a situation where Congress is the weakest branch. We don't use the power of the purse. We don't use the power to impeach civil officers. We don't use the power to deny appointments on the Senate side. And you're going to continue to get the same results. And so part of the effort with doing things like impeaching the IRS commissioner is really to resuscitate Congress's powers. Because our country is going to be the freest when we actually have Congress being an important force, checking the executive branch, checking the courts to the extent that we can do that. And when you have all the power end up in the executive branch, the founders to a man would have said, that makes your freedom in jeopardy. And so it's a larger issue than just Hillary Clinton. It's a larger issue than just the IRS. It really goes to the heart of the type of constitutional system that we have or that we could potentially continue to lose if we don't stand up and let our voices heard. And so,
why don't you impeach Loretta Lynch, too?
Well, yeah, I mean, here's the thing, though. If we can't even impeach the IRS commissioner, nobody likes the IRS. And have any of you actually seen the IRS commissioner before? He's the most arrogant, unappealing, unsympathetic guy that you can imagine. So you have one of the most hated agencies with one of the most unsympathetic people with a fact pattern that instinctively every taxpayer knows. You get a summons from the IRS, you destroy your documents, they're going to presume you guilty. So if we can't even do that, then none of the other stuff, I mean, we're just not going to. So that was one of the reasons why I thought this was very important. I mean, the IRS bothered me. because I was campaigning in 2012 for the first time, and I had some of these groups that wouldn't let me speak because they were worried that if I spoke as a candidate, that the IRS would come after them. And a lot of times I was like, you guys are being paranoid. I was like, just let me speak. Turns out they were 100% right. And so it chilled First Amendment activity right here in Florida. I saw it with my own eyes. And so the underlying offense is very, very significant, misuse of the IRS. So we can't even do that. So just understand that I don't know how much play the media is going to give, but keep an eye out for early September when this vote comes up. And I think what it'll be is it's not going to be yes or no on impeach right away. There's probably going to be a motion to table it or send it back to committee, which basically means we're not going to deal with it. So anyone who votes yes on that is effectively saying they don't want to impeach the commissioner. Guys like me will probably vote no on tabling it, meaning we want to debate it. We want it on the House floor. And I think it would be a great debate to be able to have. Yes, sir.
Well, there's only one plausible explanation for this, and that's pervasive corruption. And it makes clear that the rule of law is not being applied uniformly, and it depends on the caprice of the executive branch. That is the definition of tyranny. My question to you is, what argument can you make that people are not entitled to use self-help to restore the rule of law and the Constitution?
Well, I think the founders would say, if you would say that we had a situation where the taxing power was being abused, where you have a Secretary of State, a high official, heck, we haven't even talked about the Clinton Foundation money. I mean, can you imagine if Thomas Jefferson, when he was Secretary of State, if he was receiving millions of dollars from foreign countries, he would have been run out of town immediately. I think what they would have said was, well, no freedom-loving people is going to accept that. They're going to throw the bums out at the election time. And so I think one of the things we got to do a better job is, we'll get together in groups where we all agree on everything, and we'll talk about this, but we got to reach out to people who aren't going to come to a Republican meeting and let them know why this is not right. And I think you got to do it. It's hard work. And so we have an opportunity in November. All this stuff is out there. Everyone can see it. We can make the case from now until November. And we need the American people to render a good judgment.
What you just described tonight is exactly why Paul Ryan needs to be defeated in his primary.
I
It's
agree.
exactly why the American people are fed up with a
All
bunch
dealing
of
with your
gutless
money.
politicians in Washington, D.C. That's exactly what it is. From Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan right on down the food chain. We're sick and tired of that kind of crap.
Illusory, use the ballot in order to change the government is when you have a 95% retention rate of the incumbents because of the way the system has been advertised.
But this is not, you have a chance, what needs to be done is a change in the executive branch. That has got to happen. Because if you look at, we haven't even scratched the surface how big the bureaucracies are, how much authority the administrative state has. And that's something that's not just because of Barack Obama. That's been happening for years and years. And Congress has delegated authority to the bureaucracy because they don't want to have to make some of the tough decisions. They've delegated the power of the purse effectively by doing continuing resolutions. So just for me, because I know we're running out of time, I'm running for the U.S. House District 6. I'm the current office holder, but when the courts changed the districts, they pushed this district further into central Florida. So we had things like DeLand and Interlochen and Putnam County, and we now come into Lake County. So anything northeast of here is in District 6. We have Eustis, we have Mount Dora, we have Umatilla. And so I'm going to be very present here over the next 5 weeks before this primary. But what I would say is, we have people who always run for office. A lot of people say the same things. When I was running, I had people saying the same things as me across the country, but yet when you get to Washington, very few people actually follow through with what they said they would do. And I think for me, I haven't been there very long. I've been there 3.5 years. And so I haven't become part of the problem because I'm still trying to fight the establishment, fighting the leadership. But I have been there long enough to develop a track record so that voters can feel confident that I'll actually follow through on what I say I'm doing. So just got endorsed today by National Right to Life, endorsed by Gun Owners of America, American Conservative Union, Freedom Works, NRAs coming down the pike later this week. And then on the literature, as we put out, I'm ranked #1 in all of Florida for conservative by American Conservative Union, Citizens Against Government Waste, Heritage Foundation, National Taxpayers Union. In 2014, I was rated the #1 taxpayer superhero in the whole country by Citizens Against Government Waste. And so I think if you think that what I'm saying makes sense and you think it's good, then you can have faith that's what I'm going to do when I go up to Washington in 2017. And I hope it's on the heels of having a very strong election turnout. I don't think anyone's ever been through an election like this, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I think it could go either way. I mean, I think we could win big. I think we could lose big, depending on how things happen. But I think that you have a chance right now where enough people are really, really at the point where it's not just kind of move one chair around. I mean, we really do need wholesale change. And I ran in 2012 saying that we needed that. We obviously didn't get the election results that we wanted to. But Washington, as it's developed, is really out for itself. It does not care for the average taxpayer. And the way the policies work in the country right now, if you're just a run-of-the-mill taxpayer, you work your butt off, you try to provide for yourself, your family, the policies disadvantage you more than anybody else in society. And it's really the politically connected or different constituency groups for different parties that tend to benefit. So I think if we can really start to upend that, I think we have a chance, a pathway to start really dealing seriously with the issues, the debt, the bureaucracy, the courts, that really, really need to be addressed. And so, yes, sir.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have a question I'm really concerned about. Is there a possibility that I've been reading about Obama can make a recess appointment if there's nobody to gavel in and out of the Congress every day since you're at recess?
For the Senate.
To the Supreme Court?
For the Senate, yes. So the Senate, if they do go into recess, he can put someone in, but the Senate is gaveling in. They're not going on recess. So they actually have someone to go in there and do that. So the court, that's done. I mean, that is not going to happen before the election. And so if there's an election victory, then we have a chance to replace Scalia with a constitutionalist. If Hillary wins, there is going to be a movement by some in the GOP establishment to confirm Garland in the lame duck. I think that's a mistake because people say he's more moderate. Moderate compared to what? I mean, he may be a little bit more moderate than the New York Times editorial board, but he ain't moderate. He's going to vote to overturn the Second Amendment. He's going to vote to stifle religious freedom. He's going to vote to empower the bureaucracy. So this idea, when people in Washington say someone's a moderate, it's almost always a liberal journalist trying to make a liberal seem less offensive. Whereas with how they treat conservatives, you can just be a standard Reagan Republican. They'll say, oh, he's an extreme right wing, all this stuff. And that's so, just understand when they say Garland's a moderate, he's not moderate on the things that matter. And on the key votes, he'll join the 4 liberals, and you'll have 5 liberal justices that will effectively be acting as a super legislature, rewriting the laws, rewriting the Constitution. And that's going to be damage that is going to be very difficult to correct. And see, right now we have some failures because you can have Justice Kennedy or Roberts join with the 4 liberals, and that's been bad in certain circumstances. But Kennedy and Roberts are with the other guys way more than they are with the others. So you put Garland in there for Scalia, that's going to be every time. Every time they vote, everyone knows how it's going to come out in any high-profile case. And understand, winning the presidential election, yeah, you can replace Scalia with a constitutionalist, but you also will very likely replace Justice Ginsburg. She's been there a long time. She's losing her wits, and I think that she's not going to... No, seriously, I mean, some of the comments she makes are just indefensible. So I think that she's going to retire soon. I really believe that. And that gives you an opportunity not only to replace Scalia, but then potentially replace somebody who's on the liberal side of the court. And if you can get another Justice Thomas like judge there, then you really have a chance, I think, to start getting the Constitution right, which would be very important. And that will have a huge effect for us. So get in there and fight. I appreciate all you guys are doing, but this is a big one. And if we lose it, it's going to take a long, long time to be able to dig ourselves out of the mess. So thank you all. God bless.
Supervisor